Hi all. In this video, my focus will be on the concept of a pin, as in pinning a piece. A few subscribers have been asking for a detailed study of pins, so I decided to make this a longer video than usual. I'll try to cover a lot of ground and explain in detail as far as theory is concerned. And just to make it a little more interesting and not too monotonous, I've put in a lot of game examples as well. But before I continue, I'd just like to say that I've put in quite a great deal of effort in this video, in all my videos in fact. So at the end, if you think you got something from it, please subscribe and feel free to post your comments. Okay, so I'll start with the absolute basics of the pin here, and then gradually get into more and more complex applications. Here, as you see, white can play bishop a4, and this makes black's knight immobile, so the bishop is free to capture it on the next move. Many people have the misconception that only the bishop can pin a piece, but as you'll see ahead in this video, the bishop, the queen and the rook can be used to pin pieces. Let's go ahead and see a simple rook pin. Just look for alignment, either horizontal alignment or vertical alignment or diagonal alignment. Here in this case, the king and knight are vertically aligned, so all white needs to do is play rook e1, and the knight eventually falls. This is a common theme that occurs in the opening, but black has made a blunder. Can you see how white can continue from here? Well, the move is bishop to b5. The queen and king are aligned on the same diagonal this time, so black loses his queen. Now let's take this one step further. Consider the position again. White has a wonderful pin with bishop b5. Yeah, that's great, but this time black's queen can just gobble up the bishop, right? Of course she can, but now the black queen and king are set up for the knight fork. Knight captures c7, and the queen falls. Again, here it's white to play. This time the king and queen appear to be on the same file, so rook e1 can be played without any hesitation. And once a piece is pinned, it becomes immobile, so it can't really perform any defensive functions. Here, although black threatens a mate in 1 with queen captures h2, rook e1 prevents the queen from moving off the e file, so it's confined to the e file, and white wins the exchange. It's white to play here. It might occur to you that in this position bishop a3 pins the black bishop to the king. But the point is that usually pinning a bishop to a bishop is not very useful, or maybe even a rook to a rook. However, in some cases it happens to be a very devastating kind of attack when a bishop pins a bishop or a rook pins a rook. I've included some positions on that. It's called the cross pin, and the queen pins the enemy queen, bishop pins the enemy bishop, and so on. Anyway, here bishop a3 isn't effective at all, so think of a way to replace the black bishop by another piece. This can easily be achieved by the rook capture, so rook captures bishop. So after rook captures rook, black's bishop has effectively been replaced by a rook, and now bishop a3 can be played, and the rook has to fall on the next move. White to play. There's currently no real target for the white pieces to pin other than the e5 pawn, but pinning that pawn is kind of pointless. However, if you realize, it implies that the e5 pawn is actually loose and it can be captured. So knight captures e5. Obviously the queen cannot take the knight, otherwise it falls into the line of the rook. So it will be pinned with rook e1. That means the white has just won a pawn for free. This time it's black to play. White's king looks quite weak since there's pressure on g2. The correct start would be queen captures g2, since after queen captures queen, white's queen finds herself pinned to the king. So she loses her defensive abilities. That means that the white rook is unprotected. So why not play rook captures rook? White has to take the bishop now, otherwise black will just take on g2. This is followed by b7 captures queen, and black should have an easy game from here. It's white's play. Notice that there are more pieces on the board, especially rooks this time. So it's important to make the right rook move. Obviously white has to start with a rook capture, but it's important that he uses the right rook to capture. So white plays rook captures rook, as you see, so that after the natural recapture on d7, white has a beautiful pin, and that comes into existence with queen b5. Black's best reply is to play rook captures rook and let his queen be taken. It's white to play. Notice the pressure mounting on e6. The e6 pawn is actually loose, so white can just play knight captures e6 without any problems, and black will have to defend with rook e8 and accept the fact that he's gone down a pawn. If not, if he decides to try the exchanges at this point of time with bishop captures knight, then rook captures bishop, it's still okay for black actually, unless he decides to take here. If he takes here, it's definitely a mistake because the bishop comes into d5, and now you can see that the king and the queen are on the same diagonal, so black will end up losing his queen. Both sides look quite solid here, but black can win a piece. When a piece is pinned, just attack it. There's already a pawn on h5, a very useful resource. So black can play h4 to first kick the knight out of the way, and then h3. And the bishop now finds itself pinned to the king, so it cannot escape, and it will be taken the next move. White has a rook battery this time. That should look encouraging. Imagine black's condition without the g7 pawn. Obviously the vertical alignment suggests the possibility of a pin. That would be rook g1. So all that needs to be done is that the pawn has to be deflected, and this is done best by capturing a piece that it protects. So the solution to this is rook captures knight. So after g7 captures rook, we have rook g1. So that was the thinking process behind all these moves. If you need a pawn moved out of your way, just deflect it by capturing a piece that it protects. That's the simplest thing to do, and that's how you can clear your path. Quite an interesting idea. Okay, still plenty of positions to go. Looks like it's going good so far. I'm gradually increasing the level of difficulty as we progress through this video. I like using lots of examples. That just makes it easier to explain things. Towards the end, the complexity really increases. The cross pin, for example, is a very interesting and very unique kind of pin, which I'll discuss somewhere ahead in the video. Okay, where were we? Looks like we've deviated. Let's get back into the position. It is black to play here. What would you play here if you were black? I think queen captures rook could be played without any problems, since after queen captures queen, bishop b7 pins the queen to the king, and obviously it receives protection from the knight. So after all the smoke has cleared, white ends up winning the exchange. Here it's white to play. This position illustrates another interesting idea, which is how to get pieces out of your own way in the right way so that your pin is actually effective. Here obviously bishop d6 pins the knight, but it doesn't really help white much because black obviously has ways of getting out of this kind of pin, and white has no real hopes of gaining any material either. So the better move would be knight captures bishop, so that after knight captures knight, white can play a rook pin instead with rook f3. So the knight falls and white is up material. White's play, as usual. We can almost see a pin possibility coming up on the 7th rank. If white could just deflect the d6 pawn out of the way, then white would be able to play rook captures rook, and then go on to pin the black queen to the king. So, as I mentioned earlier, to deflect a pawn, just try capturing the piece which it protects. Here white can play queen captures knight. At this point of time, black's best shot would not be to recapture with his pawn, but instead to support the weak pawn by playing rook d8. However, if black still decides to take on e5, then it just ends up to be much worse for black. After all the exchanges, black is much worse. Although he's down 3 points of material either way, it would be better if black kept the queens on the board. Finally, a more dynamic position. It's white to play, and this is a checkmate in 7 problem. You can pause the video, take your time, and see if you can calculate all the way till the end. It's a nice combination. You must have already noticed that black's queen and king are placed on the same diagonal. White must start with queen h4, check. The bishop interposition fails since that would lead to an immediate checkmate, so the king must go to g8. And now queen g3, check. So the king goes back. And all of a sudden bishop c3 is now possible because of the queen guarding it. So bishop c3, and then queen captures bishop. This is followed by queen captures queen, and a few interpositions can be made, but they don't really help black at all. The moves d4 and rook interposition, all this really doesn't help black much, and he ends up getting checkmated with queen to g7, which is mate. Okay, so we've reached position 17. I hope this isn't getting too monotonous. Well, at least I hope you're learning something out of it. Here it's black to play, and this isn't the simplest of positions, but it is rather interesting. You can pause the video and see if you can find the best continuation for black. Black already has the idea of eventually pinning the white queen to the king. So for that, a series of exchanges will take place. Black first plays knight captures g5, which attacks the queen. So white simply takes on g5, and then rook captures bishop. This is played in order to try and deflect the queen onto a poisoned square and align it to the king. So white should just move his queen out of the way and accept the loss of a pawn. But if he instead captures the rook, it gets much worse, since black has bishop d4. And now after all these exchanges, black is up 2 points of material. When you see the enemy king in the center, I mean before it is castled, it is quite vulnerable to being kicked around. So white can play bishop a4 in this case, and the black king has to move off the light squares. It doesn't matter where the king moves, there's definitely a pin in the making. If king f8, then bishop a3 and the queen falls. Alternatively, if at this point the king goes to d8, then we have bishop g5. Either way, the queen will have to fall. This is a nice one. It's white to play. In this position, white's first move makes all the difference. and that move is pawn to g4. If you notice, black's king has nowhere to run, no escape route, so black is forced to play the only move, which is rook captures g4, and let his rook be pinned to his king. So there's no way out for the rook either, which means it can be taken on the next move. So black's position is really hopeless now, and I think he should just resign. It's white to play. Can you see how white can force a pin here? It's exactly the same idea as the previous position, so you might actually like to go back and see that one more time if you aren't able to find the sequence. Okay, it's a pawn fork, pawn to g4. Although the pawn is unprotected, it still is a dangerous weapon, since after the king takes it, white has bishop e6, and the rook is forced into the pin, as you see. Oh, this looks like a very simple position. So I think I'll just go through the moves real quick, because by now it must have become very easy to spot simple direct pins like this one. So rook e1, nothing fancy. Black will have to follow up with d6, and then white pushes the f pawn up the board to attack the knight. So black plays f6, and the knight falls. White to play. You can see that black has his king, queen, and bishop all on the same vertical line. So this should give you a hint that there might be a pin which can be exploited. You can already see that the bishop is pinned to the queen, and the queen is in turn pinned to the king. And also, white has a pawn on e5. If that could be pushed up to e6, it would be attacking the bishop, which is already pinned. This can easily be achieved by the exchange of rooks. So rook captures rook, and then e6 captures rook, so that white himself can play e6. And after that, bishop captures e6, rook captures queen, and rook captures rook. At the end of all this, white has won a queen and a knight in exchange for a rook, a bishop, and 2 pawns. What would you play here if you were playing white? It should become almost like intuition now. Queen captures rook. Check. And the queen has to take here, there's no option. And then bishop d4. But it's not over yet. Black still has counterplay. Rook e8 can of course be played, but the best move according to Rybka would be rook f1. After king d2, not rook captures rook. Not yet, but instead queen captures bishop. Check. At this point the knight can't take, so c3 captures queen, has to be played, and then rook captures rook. This is followed by knight captures rook. And white has a minor piece for a pawn, and should be able to win from here. This is a common theme that every chess player should be acquainted to. It's white to play. Notice the bishop on b5 and the rook on d1. One thing to keep in mind is that a pin always gives you another chance to add on an attacker. What I mean to say is that in this position the black knight is defended twice and also attacked twice. So it appears to be safe, but it's not actually safe because of the pin. If you go through the moves, you'll realize that you can win a piece by adding on an attacker with rook d1, and the black rook falls. Now, I think we've had enough of the direct pin, I suppose, and we've gone through quite a few of its applications as well. I think it's time for the cross pin. This is a more advanced technique. If you remember, in the beginning, I mentioned that it is possible to pin a bishop to a bishop, or a queen to a queen, or a rook to a rook, and so on. That's exactly what the cross pin is all about. In this position, it's black to play. You can see that bishop captures bishop would fork the white queen and king, but that move would not really be that great since white's queen would just take the bishop and there's nothing left after that. So bishop captures bishop is not a good idea right now. But notice that the white bishop is the only guard for the queen. And also notice that the white bishop is pinned. This means that it can't move off the long diagonal, so black has the opportunity to play queen f5. This is called the cross pin. The queen obviously can't be taken, and black also threatens bishop captures bishop, which is now a real threat, as it would end up winning the queen. White really has nothing better to play than bishop captures bishop, and let his queen be taken, since it has to be lost anyway, so he might as well take the rook on a8 at least. Let's see some more examples on the cross pin. This isn't as strong as the previous one, but it threatens a cross pin, which means it might still result in loss of material just to escape from the cross pin. The first move would be knight captures knight, and black should play king f7 here to avoid the cross pin. If he takes on f6, that would be a blunder. If queen captures knight, then white has rook e7, check, and the king cannot protect his queen. Wherever the king moves, it really doesn't matter where the king moves, it will lead to a very dangerous variation in which the queen is lost first of all, and after that there's a forced mate in 3. That would be as follows. After the king is at h6, queen captures queen, and then bishop g4, f4, and it doesn't matter what is played here, and then queen to g5. This is mate. If instead black had avoided the cross pin at this point of time, none of this would have happened, and black would be much better. Again, it's the cross pin. I must mention this is quite an advanced technique, and although it might look really simple when you're looking for it, it's actually quite difficult to find when you're playing in an actual game, in one of your real games. Because in a real game, you have other things also which concern you, maybe forks and discoveries and pins and skewers and so on. So it's actually difficult to spot such moves. In this case, it's quite simple because you're focused and looking only for that kind of move. So in this kind of situation, I hope you found the right continuation. The correct move is queen h7. Black can't take the queen here, so his best alternative would be to satisfy himself with a bishop, and then queen captures queen, and it's all over. It's black to play this time. Rook captures rook accomplishes virtually nothing at all, so he'd rather play queen d2. The rook can't take since it's confined to the third rank, so white has to play rook captures rook, after which queen takes queen, and black wins the exchange. We are gradually getting into more and more detail. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground so far. A few more positions to go though. You can pause the video and see if you can find how black should continue from here. Well, black plays rook captures bishop. Note that the f2 pawn is pinned to the king by the black bishop, so it will have to be rook captures rook. And then black swings his other rook to g8, which means that white's rook cannot move off the g file. So white will have to settle with rook captures rook and let his queen be taken. And after all this, black is definitely better. It's white to play, and the move would be rook d1. If queen captures queen, well then rook captures rook. And since that's also a check, black has to spend an extra move getting out of check. And while this is happening, white gobbles up the queen, so white has just won a piece. The idea of a checkmate threat can also be combined with the cross pin. That means that you're also pinning a piece to a square, which if reached would result in checkmate. This example clearly demonstrates that effect. There's already a rook on the 7th rank, so white can play rook c1 with the idea that if queen captures queen, then rook captures rook on c8, and that's checkmate. So instead of queen captures queen in this position, black will have to play something like rook to f6 to protect the queen. And this queen obviously still ends up being taken, but there's no more checkmate now. Here's another example of the combination. Exactly the same idea, combining a mate threat with a cross pin. It's white to play. You can take a few seconds and see if you can find how white would be able to take advantage of the position. Well, white plays bishop to e7, and black doesn't have time to play queen captures queen because of rook d8, which would be mate. So black should just take on e7 instead, after which rook captures queen, and then rook captures rook. So white is up material. It's white to play again. This time black's king is precariously placed, and white can actually exploit that by playing his queen down to a3. This checks the king, so the king has to either go to g8, or the other option would be to block the check with queen e7. Let's go through both variations. If at this point the queen decides to block the check, well then there's a mate in 13. Don't worry, I won't be going through that, but white has bishop to c6, and the bishop cannot be taken, so black's best shot would be g6. And after this we have queen captures queen, check, and the king escapes via g7, and that's how the game would continue from here. Now let's go back to the position and see what happens if in this position king g8 is played. Well then there's a nice bishop discovery. Bishop captures h7, check. After rook captures bishop, we have rook takes queen. And after the pawn recaptures, we see that white comes ahead with a queen and a pawn for a rook and a bishop. It's white to play. Look for a deflection this time. White has his rook on the 7th rank, and actually both the rook and the queen are already aimed at f7. The only obstacle is the black queen, which prevents the mate, so it must be deflected. Rook g4 does the job for white, and although black doesn't have to take, if he does, then he'll end up getting mated in 2. So a better defense would be rook f8. And after this, although black loses his queen, at least he's nullified all the immediate checkmate threats. But obviously white is much better. Have a good look at this position. It's white to play, as usual, and bishop d4 looks like a nice spin. But what are its implications? Notice that black has a move like e5, and that pawn push seems to be very irritating for white. In fact, it looks like it just extinguishes the threat of capturing the queen. But look carefully. the black king is surrounded by his own pieces. So after this pawn push, white can actually go ahead and take on e5. At this point, if the queen takes the bishop, then black gets mated next move with queen h6. And suppose he doesn't, in this position, so say black plays something like rook to f8, well then the queen can still come to h6, taking advantage of this cross pin, so that the king will have to move to g8 and it's still mate. So going back, the analysis comes to the conclusion that the move e5 is actually a blunder. At this point of the game, the move king h7 should be played, and then after these exchanges, although black is down material, heavily down material, he still hasn't lost the game by checkmate. Again, it's a mate threat plus a deflection. Right now, white's queen is the only piece preventing queen b2 from delivering mate, and bishop b5 is a nice deflection for the queen. So the queen can't take it, or else you just get mated. So white must defend his king with knight b4 and let the bishop take his queen. This is what it would look like at the end of the sequence. Okay, we've reached the last position for today, position number 37. It's a nice intricate position, and white to play queen a3, a deflection yet again, and black cannot take it, otherwise he'll get stuck in the mating net. This is what it would look like if black ends up taking the queen. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. That's all for today, folks. Take care.